Hi, I'm Dan Allen, and I will be teaching the 7 Deadly Sins, how to avoid an editor dropping the first page of your manuscript. So we're going to jump over to my presentation window so you guys don't have to look at me the whole time and start this session. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. This is going to be a lot of fun. The most important thing about writing the first page to understand is that writing the first page matters a lot. Any mistake you make on the first page, anyone reading your manuscript, whether it's another writer or an editor, is going to assume that type of mistake is present throughout your entire manuscript. It must be flawless. And as you learn to improve the writing on your first page, it's going to actually make you a better writer. So spending this much time on this short of a section will force you to learn new ways of writing. What you can do on the first page is both a function of what you can come up with and what your audience will tolerate. Some genres require getting to the action sooner. Some can tolerate a little more buildup. And so you have to strike a balance between your idea and your audience. I'm going to list a bunch of rules for you guys that can help you to improve your first page. Understand that rules are made to be broken. We break them judiciously, not out of ignorance. And I'm going to give some examples of authors who break these rules to good effect, to excellent effect. So we're going to learn them, we're going to understand them, we're going to use them, and then we're going to break them. And that should hopefully be very tutorial for us. So I'm going to start with the first of the 7 deadly sins, things you definitely don't want to do on your first page writing. The first is showy prose. Look at this picture. You got a lot of great things going on here, but there's just too much of a good thing and it's becoming a problem. The same goes for your manuscript. When your words are getting in the way of the story you're trying to tell, you're essentially telling the editor, I wrote this for me, I'm in love with myself, and I don't care about the audience, so this is not for publishing. So, take a slice of humble pie and simplify your writing to the point that your writing is not what's showing, but the story. We're going to move on to number 2, which is excessive narration. Sometimes goes along with number 1, but this can be, even if you're not using flowery words, you can still do a big dump of backstory or setting that's really out of proportion to the action that the main character is experiencing. So we will try to avoid that, and it's actually not that hard to fix. So we'll work through that in some of the workshop portions. Sin number 3 is starting with an irrelevant character. What do I mean by irrelevant? Well, that's starting with a character that the audience doesn't really relate to. A good example of this would be writing a YA book and starting with a parent. It's not going to be as catchy for the reader, and it's going to be harder to get into. You can break this rule, and we're going to look at an example where this rule is broken. It's just good to know what you're trading off to get that. Sin number 4, I call it travelogue. This is when a bunch of stuff is happening, but we don't really know how that's affecting what the main character is feeling. So we don't feel it either. So it's the same for us as reading just an itinerary. And this happens a lot on a larger scale in some of the novels that we read and LDS beta readers, where there's a character who goes to their first day of school and they go to first period, and then they go to second period, and then third period, and then fourth period. And you're just like, oh, make it stop, please. And you just want to kill yourself. What needs to happen in a manuscript like that is for the writer to ask themselves, what is the most important emotion the main character experiences on their first day at school? Write a scene about that chapter and throw the rest away. Writing is not a sequence of events. It's a sequence of emotions that we experience as a result of the emotions that the main character experiences. And so what we need to do in our writing is have something happen and then our main character react to what's happening so that our audience can too. That's called action reaction or repose. And so we're gonna actually have some manuscripts where we actually have to fix that, and that'll hopefully make that a little more clear. Sin number 5, Michael Bay syndrome. Michael Bay is the director of the Transformers movies, just full of explosions. And particularly in military science fiction, they want to drop you in the middle of a dogfight. But what it's important to realize is that unless I have emotionally connected with the POV character, the point of view character, and shown the stakes for what's going to happen if they do die, I don't really care if you're trying to blow them up. So make sure that to hook the reader into tie the reader emotionally to the main character, and then feel free to amp up the intensity. Sin number 6 is Dungeon Master syndrome. The Dungeon Master is, of course, the person who describes the world and the setting for the characters that are playing a role-playing game. And as the Dungeon Master, we're in love with the setting. But if the setting becomes more important than the characters, we've created a little bit of a problem for our manuscript. And a couple of things will happen as a result. People aren't going to connect with the main character as much. they're going to become impatient. And I think probably the worst way that we abuse our power is narrators. Occasionally, we will just like drop some blatant like fantasy or occult element in like the first paragraph, and it really feels cheap to the audience. It's like, what? Oh, well, there goes the book, right? I didn't get to discover a mystery. We love mysteries. We want to uncover them ourselves, not have them like chewed up and regurgitated and dumped in our lap, which is sometimes what it feels like when like poof, a fairy pops out of nowhere in sentence number 2. So use surprise, use some fantastical elements to generate some surprise and some interest, but make sure most importantly, that you're creating a mystery, and that will hook us a lot more than the awesomeness of some random, some occult element you've thought up. Sin number 7 is having no hook. And we always hear at writing conferences, oh, you need to have a hook. And I'm like, well, what's the hook? Well, everyone keeps talking about the hook. No one says what the hook actually is. And as near as I can tell, the hook is a question that's asked that will determine the point of view character's future. So we want, by the end of page 1, we should be asking ourselves a question: will he or won't he? The 7 deadly sins here I've got listed all, you can write them down, but I suggest you just take out your phone and take a picture or capture a screenshot. You're going to need all 7 of these because we're going to try and identify them in the next manuscripts that we look at. So again, showy prose, excessive narration, starting with a relevant character, travel logs, Michael Bay syndrome, dungeon master syndrome, and no hook. Before we get into the first manuscript we're going to look at, which is the workshop session, I want to tell you guys some of the things you can do on the first page and should do. Show off what you do best. If you're a funny writer, be funny. If your writing is just gorgeous, show off a little bit of that. But again, don't make it the whole story, but make it clear to the readers what you're offering them. This is your sales pitch. Surprises are great again, but mysteries are what set the hook. Use the senses, especially what the main character is thinking and feeling. That's the one thing we get that other forms of art don't. We get to get inside the main characters. Use cause and effect to drive action reaction. When we say what happened and then why it happened, our books become very unreadable. And so we need to switch that around to have what happens and then what's caused as a result of it. And that you can't believe how much easier it makes it reading that manuscript. In romance, we want to introduce a love interest as soon as possible. And we want to be sure to include what I call touches of reality. And we'll show a lot of those in a manuscript from Taran Matharu, which you guys are really going to, I think, get a feel for through his example there. And most importantly, as I've emphasized, if you're going to break a rule, you got to break it in style. This is The Firm by John Grisham, a wildly successful novel for many reasons. And here John Grisham kind of sort of breaks a rule. We talked about not starting with an irrelevant character and trying to get into the point of view character as soon as possible. But Grisham has to strike a balance here because he has this amazing ability to wind up tension. And he doesn't want to drop the call to action in paragraph number 3. He's gonna build it up. So he needs another way to hook the reader. And we often have this sort of struggle where we're trying to decide whether we're going to have the call to action in paragraph 1 or 2 or 3, but yet we want to really establish the normalcy, like where they are in the world before their call to action. So one sort of cheat you can do is to have a prologue, and this isn't really a prologue, but it actually is. And in this case, the senior partner is going to be reviewing the resume of Mitchell McDear, and that he's going to set the hook. So this is a dirty, cheap trick that John Grisham plays on us. And so we're going to read through it. And again, you guys look for what he does here, how he sets the hook. The senior partner studied the resume for the 100th time and again found nothing he disliked about Mitchell Y. McDear, at least not on paper. He had the brains, the ambition, the good looks, and he was hungry. With his background, he had to be. He was married, and that was mandatory. The firm had never hired an unmarried lawyer and had frowned heavily on divorce, as well as womanizing and drinking. Drug testing was in the contract. He had a degree in accounting, passed the CPA exam the first time he took it, and wanted to be a tax lawyer, which of course was a requirement with a tax firm. He was white, and the firm had never hired a black. They managed this by being secretive and clubbish and never soliciting job applications. Other firms hired blacks. This firm recruited and remained lily white. Plus the firm was in Memphis, of all places, and the top blacks wanted New York or Washington or Chicago. McDear was a male, and there were no women in the firm. That mistake had been made in the mid-70s when they recruited the #1 grad from Harvard, who happened to be a she and a wizard at taxation. She lasted 4 turbulent years and was killed in a car wreck. He looked good on paper. He was their top choice. In fact, for this year, there were no other prospects. The list was very short. It was McDear or no one. What I really love about this is that he has this slow grind. He starts out with this, something is right about this firm. They like upstanding people, but then something is sort of not quite right. And it hits you at this really subconscious level, and it just sort of ramps up the oddity of it. As you're reading through this quickly, you almost don't even catch it, but she was knocked off. And so of course, I didn't catch that the first time I read it, but it sets up this subconscious question for us. Is McDear going to join the firm or not? And if so, is he going to die too? And so he does it in a very covert way. Again, masterful by John Grisham, using the out of character prologue to set the hook before he does this nice wind up grind that he does in his suspense novels. Now we're going to learn about touches of reality from Taran Matharu. You guys are going to love this one. I'm going to highlight things as I go, and I'm not going to read it all because you guys can read it. I'm just going to give a little more commentary on what it is, what he's doing and why, and hopefully that's useful to you guys. Bam, short, punchy sentences, very effective. If Fletcher didn't make this kill, he would go hungry tonight. Kill? What are we dealing with here? Is this guy a killer? So using a powerful word like that is fantastic. Gets the adrenaline going. Dusk was fast approaching, and he was already running late. He needed to make his way back to the village, or the gates would close. So here we have a consequence. Wonderful. The next sentence does three things. If that happened, he would either have to bribe the guards with money he didn't have, or take his chances in the woods overnight. We get some world building. There's guards guarding the gate. We learn about the main character, that he's poor. We make a connection with him. And lastly, we ramp up the consequences here. We learn the stakes. And so that's a great third sentence. The young elk had just finished rubbing its antlers against a tall pine. We get some beautiful description. Fletcher could tell it was a juvenile. He's breaking a rule here. In general, we don't like to use words like he saw this or she heard that. We just say what was there and say what was heard, say the sound, describe the sound. And that helps us to be less overt in our narration. He's doing this for two reasons, as I can tell. One, he's repeating Fletcher's name so that we remember it, because we read over it in the first, we skipped over it in the first sentence, the first paragraph there. And two, he wants us to be making sure that we understand that we're seeing this story through Fletcher's perspective. So I'm cool with that. That's a good example of how to break a rule. Fletcher felt almost ashamed to hunt such a majestic creature. Well, now we like Fletcher even more. He doesn't want to kill the pretty elk, right? He's a good guy. And here's a great example of show versus tell. By showing that Fletcher understands this pittance, this small value of money, and how much he cares about how much this is worth, the author, Taran Matharu, is showing us that Fletcher's poor. And so we believe him now. And we get some streak, and we also get a little bit of world building. We learn how they count their money. A thick mist hung heavy in the air, coating Fletcher in a thin layer of dew. What do we get here? Not just description, but how the mist that's in the air is affecting the main character. Cause and effect. Absolute brilliance here by Taran Matharu. He unslung his bow and knocked an arrow to it. It was his best arrow, the shaft straight and true. The fletching from goose feathers rather than cheap turkey feathers he bought in the market. I love this description of the best arrow, because we wear arrows at Walmart, and we don't know that it's possible that they could be different from each other. And so for me, this really just took me right out of my world and into this other world. I was like, oh, huh, what do you know? Arrows can be different. So this is where we use the world that we've created to take people out of their world. So this is just a really brilliant stroke here for him. The point swam in and out of focus as he centered it on the elk. So here now, we're diving right into Fletcher's perspective. We're focusing on the point of the arrow, then on the elk. We should be aiming it slightly up from the elk, but we'll give him that one. He's using time slowing here to capture our attention. And all this while, we're like, Fletcher, go, move, hurry. You got to make it back before the gates are shut. So because he hooked us with a question first, now when he time slows, it really, really pulls us in. After he kills this elk, we read this sentence: the bloody froth bubbling from the elk's mouth was testament to that. Oh, gross. I mean, this is just gory. But the cool thing that happens here is you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, that's exactly what a dead elk looks like. And so suddenly now Matharu has not only street cred, but he's made a promise to us that whatever fantastical thing we're going to experience in this story is going to be this realistic. And so that he's making a promise. And this is a good example of that. He removed the arrow carefully and was happy to see the shaft had not snapped. Well, removing an arrow is not that easy, especially if it's got barbs. But he's using time speeding here to get on with the story. And let's check out this last sentence. Or maybe it was the coin that weighed down his pockets when he was paid afterward. Here he's taking an emotion of liking being paid and turning it into a physical sensation, really pulling us into the perspective of the main character. Turning an emotion to a physical sensation. Wow. This is fantastic work by Tara Matharu. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. What we're going to do now is dive into some manuscripts that aren't so good. And hopefully you guys have that list in front of you and you can just sort of circle or highlight all the mistakes you're able to find. And then we'll highlight them and try to fix them. This is The Goblin Curse of Hamlin. I wrote this as a goofy, over-the-top fairy tales for my kids about 10 years ago. And I was in love with the fun I was having, breaking all the rules of English, run-on sentences, archaic language, and there's a lot of charm in it. But I lost some things as a result of that. And there are definitely some things I can improve, which I hope hopefully you guys will be able to find. So I'm going to go and read through this. You guys identify problems from that list of 7 sins as we go along. A long time ago in the village of Hamlin, Germany, a very strange thing began to happen, which the villagers called their rat problem. The villagers never spoke of this rat problem outside of their town because that would be bad for their business of selling carved wooden trinkets to visitors who came up the river, which they also made for their children, for the people of Hamlin loved their children best of all. Each evening when mothers were cooking supper, the lively children of Hamlin gathered in the town square. They sang and twirled round and played chase, as children often did in those days before television. Their cries of delight were even more lovely than the bells of the village cathedral, which wasn't really a cathedral at all, but more of a church, for it didn't even have glass window panes, just holes in the mortar where windows ought to have been. And this is where our story begins, with the children gathered for choir practice. There was in the choir a very clever girl named Claire who read the words before time so that the children could sing along with the organ. But on this day, after the children sang the first word, Father Cato stood up from the organ and bellowed, "Stop this at once! Which of you devils is singing out of tune?" Nobody raised their hand. "You may hide now," Cato said, shaking an angry finger at the silent singers as bits of his spittle landed on the children in the front row. "But I will not be so lenient if it happens again. Begin." Father Cato sat upon the organ bench and eyed the children as they sang, not so beautifully as before, but definitely more carefully and quietly. They sang so quietly that Father Cato began to notice that it was the very clever girl who read the lyrics that was singing out of tune. Not always, but increasingly. Her voice was getting squeakier by the minute. Father Cato had discovered a rat. Well, it's interesting, and definitely there are some problems here. How many did you guys find? I got 6. What we have here are distracting prose. I was having a little bit too much fun with my ridiculous writing style, and of course, a lot of excessive narration, a lot. And we didn't start with the point of view character. Not only that, we don't get the reaction of the main character. So we've got a travelogue. Where Claire's reaction to anything that's going on here? We're not experiencing the story from her perspective. Dungeon Master Syndrome for sure, because I get into the setting before the character, and there's a weak hook. Where's the question here? So let's see if we can fix any of that. Here is an attempt to revise that, and I'm going to highlight things as we go along. Claire cleared her throat. She swallowed and tried again to sing the note. It was impossible. Father Cato walked along the row of singing children, eyeing each in turn as they sustained the last note of the refrain. All the children of the village Hamlin were there. It was chores otherwise, and Claire so loved to sing hymns. What was happening to her? It used to be so easy, she thought. So here we get the main character, Claire, in sentence number 1, and we get her reaction to what's happening. She's struggling. Claire tried again to make the note, but her voice cracked, making a sound like a wagon wheel squeaking, using description from her world to draw us into her world, and again, using the 6 senses. Father Cato's head whirled in her direction, and he stamped upon the ground. "Stop this at once!" Claire shuddered, desperately trying to suppress a trembling which had begun in her knees. "One of you devils is singing out of tune. Who is it?" Cato demanded. To Claire's relief, his eyes scanned the other direction. So here we get a lot of action-reaction. So Cato looks at her, she freaks out, he looks away, she's relieved. No one raised their hand. "You may hide now," Cato said, shaking an angry finger at the silent singers as bits of his spittle landed on the children in the front row. "But I will not be so lenient if it happens again. Begin." Well, I keep this sentence because of all the fun alliteration there. And we move on to the next sentence. Father Cato walked to the organ, played the beginning note, and eyed the children as they sang. Not so beautifully as before, but definitely more carefully and quietly. They sang so quietly that Father Cato began to notice that it was the girl Claire in the first chair that was singing out of tune. Not always, but increasingly. Her voice was getting squeakier by the minute. Father Cato had discovered a rat. They were called rats, but that was to keep visitors from knowing the terrible truth. Hamelin, Germany did not so much have a problem with squeaking rats as it did with squeaking children. For although the parents of Hamelin loved their children best of all, the priest would not allow a child to the devil in their village. Goblins were the worst kind of abomination. So now the question in our mind is Cato going to get rid of Claire because she's turning into a goblin? So, and what's going to happen to Claire? So we have a hook, finally. So this is a vast improvement over the previous manuscript. We're experiencing it through the point of view character. We're hooked. It's a lot more immersive, and we don't have to wade through flowery language and excess prose or wonder how the main character is feeling about what's happening. So now, I wrote that 10 years ago. So to make sure I don't get too proud here, we're going to look at a manuscript I wrote less than 6 months ago and let you guys critique this one and see what errors you can find here. Certainly there will be a few. This is Jack and the Beanstalk, a sci-fi retelling of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack walked quickly, head down, avoiding any potential eye contact, his hands shoved into the pockets of his black leather jacket. Ahead, a homeless woman crouched against the metal security shutter that was rolled down in front of a closed shop. The woman looked up as he approached, and Jack thought he saw the eyes of his mother. The image startled him. His steps faltered, and he felt in his pocket for some change before coming to his senses. Not now, too risky. Jack was 2 blocks from the finance district, and the subway station was just around the corner. Almost there. Inside his jacket pocket, Jack's hand closed more tightly on the thick envelope of bills he had just received from the bank teller. It was the only money he and his mother had. He winced at the thought. 1 week ago, his family had hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets. 1 week ago, Jack had had a father. That was before Roger Englishman, lead investigative reporter for the Sentinel, was found dead in an alley only a few blocks away. Well, we've made some improvements here. We've got some cause and effect. He doesn't have any money. He's wincing at that thought. But there are some elements we can improve on. There's some excessive narration here. Some talking about some metal security shutter rolled down in front of a closed shop. Kind of skipped over that as I was reading it. My eyes did. Who's this homeless woman? Are we supposed to care about her? And the stakes are revealed too late. This is the whole reason we should be worrying about Jack is because he's got a whole bunch of money in his pocket. We don't find out about that until after he's had a confrontation with someone who wants his money. So a lot of tension that could have been there wasn't there. So we got that hook too late. So we're going to try and fix all those things with just a few simple changes. Inside the pocket of his black leather jacket, Jack's hand closed more tightly on the thick envelope of bills he had just received from the bank teller. He walked quickly, head down, avoiding any potential eye contact. And now we know why, because he's got all the money, right? So now we're immediately thinking to ourselves, because we know this is a story. We've read the book Jacket. We know it's a retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk. He's going to trade the money for the magic beans. Don't do it, Jack. A homeless woman sitting on the sidewalk reached out a begging hand. We got rid of all the description of her environment and let you imagine it. For a moment, Jack thought he saw the eyes of his mother. Now we like Jack. He's thinking about his mother. He could spare a few dollars. Again, he's merciful. We like Jack now. Not now, he reminded himself. Too risky. So I put the said bookism in there the first time I use italics for thoughts so that people know that those are thoughts. The subway station was just around the corner, almost there. Notice that I cut out the mention of the finance district. It's just confusing where he's going and where he's coming from. Obviously, he came from a bank, so we don't need to add any more description on that. His mother was counting on him. The $9,000 in his pocket was the only money he and his mother had. He winced at the thought. Again, kept that nice cause and effect action there, and his mother counting on him, just upping the stakes. 1 week ago, they had owned hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets, and now we are done with this Jack and the Beanstalk revised, much improved, thanks to the 7 deadly sins. We are going to jump now into one more before we review. This next manuscript is just a little bit of candy for you guys for listening and sitting through my poor manuscripts. Terry Harmon, a Utah author, wrote Blood Moon, and in my mind, this was one of the most brilliant young adult fantasy romance book startings I had ever read. It was just fantastic. So you guys sit back, enjoy this one, and then we're going to think about what she did. She breaks a rule here, and you guys will notice it, but boy, does she break it in style. Old Tuesday night, 2 weeks after her high school graduation, Willa Fairfield stood at the soda machine filling a glass with Dr. Pepper, absently wondering what movie to watch after her waitressing shift, when she felt him walk in. Warm electricity washed through her body, stealing away her breath. With a short gasp, she set the half-full glass of soda on the counter, almost spilling it. The intensity started in the space behind her heart, radiating outward to fill her whole body in the blink of an eye. She gripped the sides of her head, teetering on her feet, her head spinning, deliciously dizzy. She fought to pull in a full dredge of air as the heat heightened, growing, pulsing. Willa swept her eyes around the small dining room of the 12 Acres Diner, expecting to see patrons bending over and gasping. But everyone sat serenely eating, gossiping, and carrying on as usual. She spun around, looking for the source of the unexpected sensation. Everything was the same. Yet her body was absorbing warmth from somewhere, sucking it in like sand soaking up sunshine. The heat throbbed, warming her chest, belly, and pelvis. She pushed a hand to her gut and pulled in a shallow breath. Am I sick? The fever curled inside her, blooming with a zing of energy, leaving her weak and exhilarated at the same time. Do I collapse to the floor or run around the block? Willa limped toward the swinging kitchen doors, thinking about the comfy chairs in the break area near the back of the restaurant. She wondered if she could make it without anyone noticing her wobbly legs and flushed skin. Pulling in a half breath in an attempt to steady herself, she pushed through the doors. There he stood. The source. A fresh burst of heat hit her full in the face as she stumbled back, bumping into the swinging door. He stood next to the time clock, fumbling with his apron, shaking his head, blinking in confusion. Instantly, their eyes met, and we are hooked. Okay, this was absolutely mesmerizing to me. Pow, right? She got me. She dumped magic on me in the first page, but she also set up a great mystery. I will read this book. I will read the entire series just to prove to myself that Willa ends up with this guy because they're destined to be together, because she felt that. So a great example of a fabulous first page from her. You'll see a lot of cause and effect, a lot of us feeling things as a result of what she is feeling, the exact goal you want to have in a first page. I couldn't stop reading this. I don't think the editor could either, which is why she got published. 7 Do's of Page 1. Again, show off what you do best. I think Taran Matharu did that. I think all these writers really showed off what they do best. Grisham's slow grind, his subtlety, his subconscious things, his clues, Matharu's touches of reality, and Terry Harmon's absolute mastery of this art of introducing the love interest early. So we're going to set the hook with mysteries. We're going to use all 6 senses. We're going to have cause and effect, showing action and reaction of our main characters so we can experience the story through their perspective, introduce that love interest as soon as possible, and include touches of reality. And then go ahead and break the rules, but break them in style if you're going to do it. 7 deadly sins. Avoid these, break them at will, but be aware of what you get and what you trade for when you do so. So I think with that, I thank you guys for your attention. It's really been a pleasure preparing this. I learned a lot getting from this one. If you check out my Sci-Fi Fantasy Fun channel on YouTube, you can see not only this, but the presentations from last year, and hopefully more presentations as well. Connect with me on Twitter, authordanallen.com, and you can check out my novel, Fall of the Dragon Prince, a story of 5 children of an emperor who were born in different realms of an empire, each not knowing their destiny to become heirs of the throne. They have to find each other, find out who they are, and come together to save the kingdom. So it's a lot of fun: dragons, romance, action, and in a world you can just disappear into. So that's what I do best is the world building. So that's what I show off on my first page. And of course I break rules. So you'll get a kick out of that. You can when you find those, you can text me or message me and say, hey, I saw these rules you broke. So again, thank you for your attention. I'm going to actually switch back over now. So you guys so I can wave off, say goodbye to you guys. Thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for the other sessions in this LDS Beta Readers online session, and check out the other ones that have already been posted.